Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another edition of AUHSD Future Talks. I'm your host, Michael Matsuda, the superintendent of the Anaheim Union High School District. And as our 8,000 podcast listeners know, this is all about the future of education, which is right now. And we have a wonderful guest today, an amazing superintendent who is now the assistant executive director for the American Association of School Administrators. John Malloy. John, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Michael. It's great to be here.
So just a real thumbnail on who John is. He was the former superintendent of the San Ramon Valley Unified School District. And then prior to that, he worked in Canada as the director of education, which is the superintendent at the Toronto District School Board in Toronto. So he has had many hats in many areas. And really, we're so excited, John, that you are now with AASA and a role that supports transformational school systems across the United States. So let's hear a little bit more about you, John, and how you ended up in this role.
Well, thanks, Michael. As I said, it's great to be here. My whole commitment over the last almost 40 years is to support leadership development for our students, for our staffs in our districts. And I've gotten to serve in 3 districts in 2 countries. And I think that what it provided for me is a real breadth of understanding of all the ways that we can transform. The challenge is we talk a lot about transforming, but we sometimes struggle to actually make it happen. And so for me, my commitment has always been to create leadership conditions that allow lots of people to engage together, always focused on kids and what they need, and then change the structures and environments and rules and policies where applicable so that we can actually make that transformation happen. So I've always been excited to talk about leadership and creating what kids need.
You know, so that is exactly the challenge, moving from what we call poster to practice. And I know that you've consulted and advised a number of superintendents. What are sort of the common challenges or entry points that you feel districts need to implement change?
So, Michael, my experience was in big urban with some of the challenges that might be part of that context. And then I worked in a suburban district with about 30,000 kids that had very different issues. But I think the one thing that gets in the way of the transformation we're talking about is the status quo is alive and well. And there's a ton of reasons for that. Everybody went to school, so everybody can be an expert on what schools should look like. Policies and practices can sometimes reflect what we've been doing for decades. And some of it is okay, but a lot of it needs to change. And yet, when we start to try to make changes, this is what I started to learn is some of the biggest challenge that we work through is so many people actually become uncomfortable. Staff, maybe. Certainly our families sometimes, and that discomfort is another reason that holds us in place. But the shining light in all of this, in my own experience, is our students speak a truth about what they need and why they need it in ways that probably move mountains more than anything I've ever experienced. So for me, in the leadership that I have been a part of, really leaning on students has become a big opportunity to help us move some of the challenges, obstacles, and mountains that keep us firmly in place with a model that, as we know, Michael's been around for a long, long time.
But also, that could be a scary thing, right? Because the status quo systems don't necessarily want to hear from students because who knows what they're going to say. So let's go there in terms of what are some specific examples that you've seen or you've promoted in terms of developing student voice and agency within systems?
Michael, I think that as leaders, when we talk about student voice and agency, just like when we talk about education, we've got to move beyond some of the structures that are usually discussed. Yes, student senates are important and superintendent advisory councils are necessary. I'm in no way negating that. But sometimes when we create only those kinds of structures, we tend to get kids who are comfortable putting their hand up. We tend to get kids who are oftentimes already engaged, and we don't necessarily hear from the voices of those whose experience might be different. And so I think as leaders, when we speak about voice and agency, it's not just about listening, it's about what is it that we do with the information they share. And in my experience, we have to be sure, though, that we're creating safe spaces for our young people to share their voice. I've seen our kids share their perspectives in boardrooms, which are obviously more political. I've seen students share their experiences in community, in their own schools. And what our job is as the adults sometimes is to get out of the way after we've created those conditions. Because the other thing we sometimes do, I think, is we say we're here for student voice, student panel, and to listen to what it is they need. And then if we pay really close attention, the adults' voices are still filling the room. And so what I've learned is that we've got to be intentional about that. We've got to invite the voices and experiences of kids who don't normally come forward. We've got to figure out how to make that inviting. And we also have to leverage student leaders to help other students come forward, because what I have found is, I'm a lot older than the students we serve. And the young people who are the peers to the class we're talking about, they can also give us tremendous ideas on how to proceed. But I would argue that the transformation will be driven faster and more effectively by keeping that student experience, voice, and agency centered in this whole discussion.
So what you're promoting is sort of this, maybe a different approach to even classroom instruction in terms of that give and take and allowing students more choice in deciding on what issues are important to them. And can we go a little bit deeper into what you're talking about? Because you said earlier, once you have student voice, then it's on the adults to respond to that in some way.
Well, when we listen to students, I love how candid they are. They tell us they're bored. They tell us, if we ask, why they might not be attending school. We've been talking all about chronic absenteeism across this country, and yet when we lean in and say why, kids will say why they're disengaged, why they don't feel connected, why they don't feel they necessarily belong. And yet our paradigm continues to be adult-directed, students follow, and we follow a cadence of, oftentimes, especially in high school, the lecture approach, followed by the test or examination, and move on to the next topic. Ignoring it would appear, the interrelationship of concepts and ideas, the passions, interests, and strengths that students have. And I want to be clear, I'm not suggesting that student choice and voice should be everything, because our kids need to be challenged. They need to be exposed to ideas that they may not even understand or know it even exists. So I'm not suggesting it's a one-way approach, but clearly the paradigm that allows kids to experience, get outside the walls of the classroom, work collaboratively with each other, think deeply, create often, and then communicate what they've learned through presentation, through debate, through speech, however you wish to do it. These are things that when I walk into a classroom, when I walk into a school, and I see way more students speaking, when I see tons of engagement, when I see teams and groups everywhere, and when I ask one question, what are you focused on and why? And when they can answer that with an articulate energy, and they can actually go deeper with why this is important, then I know I'm in a learning environment that has truly grasped the imagination of our students. And again, as I shared at the beginning, Michael, this is almost 40 years for me. This is year 39. We've been talking about this for decades. The difference right now is the world rapidly changing at a pace that I've never seen in my life. The artificial intelligence emergence, which I see as an opportunity, but with some challenges that we need to face. But it's going to change on us whether we change or not. So let's get moving, because we don't have any more time to sit and wait. The change is upon us, and our kids deserve our attention, I think, in this regard.
I think we certainly are at an inflection point in terms of where education is going. Because on the one hand, you have a number of communities and superintendents talking about learning loss and test scores. We have to double down because we're behind. Public perception is that we're behind. On the other hand, you have those promoting more of this engaged critical thinking that you're talking about. Is it an either or proposition, or can both be met?
Well, it's very much a both and, but then Michael, you just raised another important question for me. And I know that this is an important question for you because I learn from you regularly as well. What are we measuring? When we look at our tests, when we look at our evaluations, when we look at our standardized processes, what is it that we're measuring? And does it align with what we know our kids need now and will probably need into the future? So when we all talk about graduate profiles or learner profiles or whatever it is a district might call the commitments they make to their community of what their students will be able to be, do, know, and understand when they graduate and move beyond us, it's usually in the realm of the deep thinking. It's usually in the realm of the ability to work in teams. It's in the reality, it's being flexible, it's being adaptive. It's understanding how to pivot when new issues and new ideas emerge, to evaluate, to synthesize, all of these things that I truly believe are a part of and have been a part of our education system for forever. The challenge is we still are a bit obsessed, and I'm going to take a page from Michael Fullen's book right now. I'm going to give my mentor credit. We can still be content obsessed. We can still be holding on to knowledge-based learning, which again, there's a place for some of that foundational work. But then where are we taking it? Or are we staying at a place where kids are memorizing facts that are readily available to them through all kinds of technological sources, when we really need to be thinking about how our kids are thinking about the information? They're going to find it. What do they do with it? How do they actually challenge it? How do they apply it to what it is that they're interested in learning and where they want to take their learning to the next level? So my goal as an educational leader, now working with districts all across the country, is take stock of where the learning is in your district right now. Pay attention to what it is that you're measuring and how that aligns with your district's values, and allow it to be a both and, where there is foundational skills that are taught. Yes, we should be assessed on those. And we're taking the kids, because we've created the learning conditions, so much further. That's my hope for this next chapter of our educational transformational work.
You know, one of the, I think, big challenges out there is that too many of our young people are graduating without a healthy skepticism about information, right? Questioning where it's coming from. And as you pointed out, if we're focused on facts, we are leaving out the sort of the emotion behind that, and that leaving out what is the purpose for the kid, for the child, what is their purpose, and that sort of intrinsic motivation of looking a little bit under the hood, because so much of their information and their curriculum is not in schools. It's, as you know, in social media. And that arguably is now the domain of a lot of fake news and artificial intelligence and all kinds of manipulative things that are going on. What you describe, is that a way forward to bridge that huge gap in terms of having this sense of healthy skepticism about information?
Yeah, Michael, I think the healthy skepticism, the ability to have conversations with others who differ from the perspectives we hold, the ability to think deeply about others' ideas, even when we don't readily accept them on the surface. This whole dynamic has got to be foundational in what we do in classrooms. Let's just talk for a minute about our own social media feed. It knows me. The algorithms know exactly what to place in front of me. And I'm conscious of the fact that I don't see many other perspectives in my own social media feed. And I'm guessing every one of us has the same experience. But if young people aren't taught to question, then an acceptance of whatever they hear could lead to greater divides. And again, without getting too much into political dynamics, I think I want to speak about a human dynamic. We are divided in many ways right now, not just in our country, but across this globe. We are having difficulty sitting in rooms with people who think differently than we do. We aren't exposed enough to other ways of thinking about complex issues in order for those conversations to happen. But again, I'm going to turn to our students. In my experience, when we place really challenging issues in front of them regarding some of our community, national, and global challenges, what I've always appreciated when those conditions are set, students will dive deeply into trying to understand what are others saying, what are others feeling and thinking. They'll question when we give them that invitation. And if we provide that in a way that honors their voice first, I've seen transformation happen. But again, if we don't provide that invitation, I think we'll just all continue to remain in our own silos of belief and understanding. So where I'm going with this is to say, it's not just about schooling, public education, but it is about our community. It is about our society. And I think that, again, it may have been a nice thing for us to consider 15 years ago to transform in this way. I would argue now at this stage of my career, it's absolutely necessary.
So what I think you're also arguing for is that teachers need to be more relevant than ever, because what both you and I are describing as a North Star, we only go as far as those teachers in the classroom. Could you talk a little bit about that and some of the structures that you've seen out there supporting teachers?
So what I'll say is that I appreciate our teachers and our educators in schools across this country and in the schools that I've served in and the districts I've served in so much. And let me start with the political body who makes decisions and gives the direction to the superintendent and then to the staff. Our elected officials matter. They matter a lot. And the reason I say that, Michael, is because an educator, a teacher in a classroom is working in a context. And no matter what they believe or what they believe they should be doing or how they believe they should provide learning opportunities for kids, they need to do that in an environment that is supported by the school district, the board, the superintendent, and the district team. So I'm not suggesting that they, meaning the board or the superintendent or cabinet, drive everything. Absolutely not. It is a shared leadership process. But our educators can only do the work we're talking about if there is a context that is supported, and our political leaders matter in that. But let's say then, how do we get through some of the challenges that exist across our country? And I would say, stay focused on the students, stay focused on where our world is going, and stay focused on what they need to be contributing citizens in this amazing nation that we live in, and drive it that way. Think about their livelihood, family, and career down the road. Think about the skills that they need to be successful in a society where they're going to change jobs a ton of times, very different than how I was raised. So when we stay again focused on the kids, I'm going to be idealistic. I think we could rise above the fray. And when we rise above the fray, then I believe that as a school district, working hopefully collaboratively with other school districts, we can help our teachers focus not just on content, but on process. We can help our teachers focus on how they're assessing kids' learning so that it is really an authentic understanding of what kids know and understand. How we're giving kids multiple opportunities to show us what they can do and how they can do it. And that is a far cry from the traditional paradigms, Michael, we've had forever. So I think that it takes the political body to provide some direction. I think it takes a superintendent and cabinet team that creates conditions. I think there needs to be a ton of shared leadership in the community so that there's ownership. And then I truly believe that educators are the most amazing people when it comes to serving kids' needs. But you got to have a few things in place, I believe, in order for it to be successful.
I wrote an article recently on the rapid growth of micro schools and how micro schools are accessing very powerful AI tutors and to really give the public, give parents more choices in personalized learning. There's a lot of hesitancy with this status quo world that you talked about, which is many public schools, to embrace AI tools and technology. Could you talk a little bit about where do you think we need to go?
So again, this is going to be a both and response, because I am really grateful for what artificial intelligence can provide for our kids and for our schools. And I still see a very important place for educators and families and communities to support our learners' growth. So it is a both and in that, again, we've been knowledge focused for so long in schools. And yet all I need to do is turn to my phone, which is right next to me, and I can get access to tons of information. The challenge is, what tools am I going to use to actually decide if I'm going to accept everything that I am reading? Or how will I probe what I am reading based upon what artificial intelligence has shared? How do I probe that so that I can get really the deepest, most authentic, most accurate response to the questions that I'm grappling with? So that's just one example. The tutoring side of things, again, I've studied a little bit of what's happening in that realm. And for so many kids, artificial intelligence and tutoring can be very important. But there's a however. We need the human connection. We need the human community. We need to be looking after each other, especially our kids. We need to be compassionate, empathetic, and that sense of emotion that comes from authentic and real relationships. None of that's coming from artificial intelligence. And so what I would like to see us do is, one, we do need policies and regulations. We do need to be aware of privacy and security issues. We need to be sure that our kids are able to use the tools, such as artificial intelligence, ChatGPT and such, but that we invite them to go beyond the tools so that they're still engaged in that personal reflection. They're still engaged in that application. They're still engaged in, so where am I going to go with the information that I just learned, which I truly believe is something that artificial intelligence isn't going to provide, and that we as educators have to help our students lean into. Again, if we ignore it, if we don't embrace it, if we try to figure out a way to run away from it, it's here. So then I think it's going to impact the effectiveness of public schools, the relevance of public schools, really all schools, if we don't lean in this way.
I love the energy that comes out of you, John. I mean, I just like, let's go, let's move it. And, as the Assistant Executive Director of AASA, a lot of challenges ahead. And I just want to end with this question about how do we take care of ourselves with so many layers of anxiety living in this post-pandemic world?
Michael, I had the privilege of being a superintendent for 15 years, and I would say that it was probably one of the most privileged opportunities of my life, because what I got to do for all of those years, and the years before as well, but I got to work with great people who cared deeply about students and who wanted to make the best impact possible. That is who I think about right now when I'm reflecting on what motivates, what inspires, and what drives good work. I'm also thinking about so many students who've come back to our communities to share what we have meant to them and what our presence as educators or as schools or school districts has done for them. And I'm grateful that we've broken open the school walls into the community, who are providing great learning opportunities and work opportunities and all kinds of other ways to help grow our students so that they can become the best they can be. So there's a lot of tension, as I said earlier, and you've mentioned, there's some division that unfortunately might take our attention. But what I think right now is the most important thing, and that's one of the reasons I'm grateful to be at AASA. I work with an executive director, Dave Schuler, and an associate executive director, Chris Gilmore, who are creating conditions for us to say, put our leaders first. What do they need? How can we provide it? And what I'm learning is our leaders need space to come together, whether it's virtually or in person. Our leaders need opportunities to network with each other authentically with real problems of practice that they can put on the table. Our leaders need a place sometimes to go for renewal, for rest, most importantly, rejuvenation. Leadership has always been difficult. We've got certain challenges right now, but it's always been a gift. And so our job, our goal, our desire at AASA is to support leaders across this country. When I worked in a district, we supported leaders across our district. And my closing thought would be, we've got to stay connected. And we've got to be intentional about that. And in that connection, we got to push further than we've been able to push before, because our kids deserve it.
Wow. John, thank you so much. That went by in a blink of an eye. I think your tagline is moving us from either or to both and. Thank you so much, John, and we look forward to hearing more great news from AASA. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. Appreciate being here.